Howdy, 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 this is Ryan Acid Murphy coming to you with a new video series. This is going to be kind of a quickie, but I kind of got it into my head because I do kind of like watching some of the react people that will react to heavy metal songs, especially people who have never heard heavy metal before, or they're brand new to heavy metal. Now, what this put into my head was, it's interesting to see reactions. But as someone who enjoys heavy metal music, I do get a little bit irritated when I see somebody get suggested a song that is just, okay, this is way too much for you right now. You're just getting introduced to this style of music. Like, you'll see a video of people who will go to, like, a pop music concert, and they'll play something that's like death metal for them, which is, if you're completely new to heavy metal, death metal is a style that tends to be really rough vocals, that sort of stuff, the Cookie Monster vocals sort of thing, and really crunchy, distorted music, a lot of really dark topical matter for lyrics and whatnot. It's not something that you introduce somebody to heavy metal with, okay? This is taking somebody and not throwing them in the deep end. That's taking them out in a boat in the ocean and just tossing them in and telling you, swim to shore, okay? And it's stupid. I mean, it's kind of funny to see the reactions of people just, kind of going, whoa. But at the same time, you are representing an entire genre of music to people, and then basically confirming their fears in a lot of ways. Oh, this is evil, horrible music for miscreants and terrible people. Even though it is quite common that people that listen to heavy metal listen to quite a few other genres, including classical music. It's quite common. And there's a reason for that, and that's what we're going to be covering in these videos. I'm going to go through the history of heavy metal in a brief kind of way. I'm not going to do an entire, breakdown of every single element of its history. You can go to Wikipedia if that's what you're looking for. I'm just going to kind of go through its history a little bit and do some recommendations for songs. So if you are interested in heavy metal, maybe you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, or something that is interested in it, or a new friend or whatever that's interested or listens to heavy metal, you're just curious about the genre. Whatever your reason is, I'm going to try to help you understand it a little bit better so it'll be easier for you to get into it. And that would include anybody that does reaction videos. Okay. So, you want to go all the way back to its earliest origins, you do have to go to classical music. All modern music has some roots in classical music. Okay? Even blues. Everything has some origins there. At least in terms of things like note structure and whatnot. You can find all that in classical music and folk music. Think older stuff. And you will find elements of that in heavy metal. So, folk music, you can actually get some touches of modern heavy metal and music, modern music in general. You will find some touches of it, some origin for it within folk music, but I'm going to stick to classical music to start with. Bluegrass actually would be a good type of folk music to explore if you're curious, but I'll leave that there. It's the banjo, the plain fast sort of thing. So, classical music. So we gotta go to Beethoven here. Before Beethoven, classical music tended to be a lot about rules. There was structure to what you were supposed to do. Everything was about rules and the types of music that you were doing. For example, a piece of music that a lot of people find very evocative is the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Okay, this is a Bach organ piece for organ. It's the first piece done in Fantasia. If you don't know which one I'm talking about, you've ever seen Fantasia. It's used a lot. Anytime something creepy, it's a creepy really in-your-face kind of piece of music, but it is called the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, and it's purely a description. It's a toccata, a fugue, and it's in D minor. It's two types of, one type of music that leads into another kind, and then the key of the piece. You have to go to Beethoven when you really start seeing breaks in the rules. It was the start of what they call the Romantic period of music, which some people consider is to still be in, because it's more about expressing yourself. And that's what Beethoven kind of brought to music. He completely changed the landscape of what music could be and would become. But there is also something else. Mozart before him also could be considered the first rock star because he liked to break the rules too. But when we're talking about musical structure, there's another specific reason that I picked Beethoven. It's because he was kind of the first one to use this idea of taking a simple piece of music like dun 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 dun, beginning of Beethovens Fifth, and then taking that and then exploring it and changing it or building on it throughout an entire piece. Beethoven's entire Fifth Symphony is built around those notes. Dun 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 dun. And then he just changes it slightly and then builds on it throughout the entire symphony. It's a riff. It's the first, he was the first one really to do riffs in his music. Rhythmic riffs. So that is why I start with Beethoven. And the Fifth Symphony is a good piece of music to explore. Now, if you want to get into some of his big time rule breaking, the Ninth Symphony is one of my favorite pieces of his. It's a long piece of classical music, but it did something that other symphonies before it never really did. He used a choir. Usually symphonies were their own thing and choral pieces were something else entirely. He combined the two. Which is why really the last, or really the second half almost, of Beethoven's Ninth is almost an entirely new symphony contained within, or at the end of the first one. It's for the time it was incredibly groundbreaking and different. Some other stuff you might want to check out. Some of these are just personal favorites of mine, but they do have some of those feelings. Again, the Toccata and Fugue is good if you want something with a creepy vibe to it, but it's earlier stuff. Mozart, the Eine kleine Nachtmusik, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of. You can kind of hear the mechanical almost structure, the rule structure, but then you can also get some of his rule breaking in there, where he liked to screw around with conventions. Other Beethoven, the Hammerklavier, is a good piece. Very, very strange and dissonant at times, but it's an interesting one to listen to. Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre is a favorite of mine. And, those you can get some interesting things there that you will find somewhat similar to heavy metal. Because there are lots of different types of heavy metal. This is the first thing we have to get across here, is that heavy metal is one of the things anyway, not the first thing necessarily, but there's more than one kind of heavy metal. You have to understand this. There are lots of different subgenres, just like with electronica music. Electronica music, it seems like everybody wants to have their own subgenre in electronica. It's not that bad in heavy metal, but there are a lot of subgenres. So after we move on from classical into more modern music, you can start getting some glimpses into the future of heavy metal music, what would become heavy metal, with the likes of Screamin' Jay Hawkins. I Put a Spell on You is the song. Most people have probably heard this at least around Halloween time. But he liked to use kind of shock rock. I mean, he was shock rock before shock rock was a thing. Because he had come out dressed up like a voodoo priest or something. Or, like an African tribal shaman or something. And he had these just huge screaming vocals that he would do. After that, you can start getting into rock music, and there's lots of rock music that can be said to be precursors to heavy metal, but just some ones that you can check out that you've probably already heard, but if not, Born to Be Wild by Steppenwolf is probably the first time the term heavy metal was actually used. Heavy Metal Thunder. And, it has a lot of elements of what would become heavy metal. You can also look into blues music. Robert Johnson has a hell of a lot of influence on blues. Blues, rock, and heavy metal. And, some of the old school blues acts, not necessarily B.B. King. B.B. King is great, but I'm talking more like the old school guys. Again, Robert Johnson, Lead Belly, some of those guys. You can look into them too. Jimi Hendrix, of course, and I'd go with Foxy Lady. Pretty much any Jimi Hendrix is going to give you some glimpses into what would become heavy metal, particularly the shred kind of heavy metal. Anything that focuses a lot on guitar shredding. But Foxy Lady I wanted to pick because it's acid rock. He uses a lot of distortion. And he was one of the pioneers of using a lot of those weird distortion kind of sound effects in his music. He wasn't the only one, but he was one of the pioneers. And, things like the feedback from the speakers, doing stuff like that. And I think Foxy Lady kind of showing where you're getting some of those first transitions from rock to metal. Foxy Lady's a good one. Iron Butterfly Inagata de Vita is another good one. It is a rock song that has all the elements of heavy metal. It's all right there. It's just that they haven't dialed it up yet. It's not as dissonant and distorted. It's not as yelly and growly yet. It's not as dark. But all the elements are still there. And then, of course, we have to talk about Alice Cooper. Welcome to My Nightmare is a good one. Pretty much all of his early stuff. Anything off of Welcome to My Nightmare is a good example. Along with Kiss, Alice Cooper has probably influenced the look of heavy metal more than anyone. Though Kiss and Alice Cooper. So, there you have it. Those are some earlier acts, and there's lots of them. Again, you can go to Wikipedia, and there are entire huge articles about heavy metal and early heavy metal and where it came from. And if you really want to dig deep into it, you can go look there. But if you're just looking for a primer, these are my recommendations. I'll just go through them right quick. Here is a list. So, some Beethoven, do the Fifth Symphony, do the Ninth Symphony, the Hammerklavier. You could also check out St. Saëns, Danse Macabre, Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik would be a good one. You can also check out the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, Bach. Let me bring up one of my classical playlists here just to be thorough. Alright. Yeah. It's kind of a goofy song, but Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody #2, you would recognize it from Looney Tunes. It's used several times through Looney Tunes. But that's also a really good one. The Rossini's William Tell Overture has some elements in there, particularly before you get to the gallop at the end. And yeah, I think, check some of those out, and it should give you some glimpses into how classical music has influenced modern music and indeed heavy metal. Okay, after that, then we can go into some of the earlier stuff. As I said, I Put a Spell on You, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, probably going to be the first song that could have been said to have heavy metal vocals. It's screamin', not screaming, screamin', with just the apostrophe in, I think it would be Jay Hawkins, I Put a Spell on You. And then also some other blues acts. You can look into Leadbelly, Robert Johnson. Again, I should have left my music player up blue, so let's see. Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Willie Johnson, Blind Willie McTell, Bo Diddley. There's definitely some interesting rhythmic stuff going on there. Cab Calloway with St. James Infirmary, and Minnie the Moocher. You've probably heard Minnie the Moocher. Howlin' Wolf. Again, Leadbelly, Robert Johnson. Check out some of those guys. The old-timey blues guys. Then you can get into some more rock stuff, earlier rock stuff. With, again, Steppenwolf, Born to be Wild is a good one. Let's see here. I'm just looking through some of my playlists, looking for any really good recommendations I can give you. This looks to be mostly new stuff. Where is my... Weird. I'm gonna have to try to do this off the top of my head a little bit then. So, Steppenwolf, Born to be Wild, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, Iron Butterfly, Cream, White Room, Strange Brew. Let's see, some of the Queen stuff. Let's see, Queen, where are you? There we go. So, Hammer to Fall, and, Hammer to Fall would probably be about the best one from Queen. Jethro Tull has some decent stuff, although they were actually a bit further along, but they put out some interesting music. Jethro Tull, like I said, Alice Cooper. And again, you would want to go a bit older stuff, because once heavy metal came around, he started being influenced by it rather than the other way around. So I'd say, stick to Welcome to My Nightmare. Well, I don't want to spend forever on this, so again, Jimi Hendrix, Foxy Lady, some of the later stuff by the Beatles, like Helter Skelter, obviously. And, just explore some of the harder side of rock from the 60s, and you'll start seeing some of those things that influenced heavy metal. Alright, so that wraps up our first episode of this. Let's go ahead and move on into the next video. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.